Well, hello everyone. Good morning and afternoon and evening. Welcome to the Accounting for Impact first event of the year 2026. Thank you for joining from different places. I see that we have all continents covered pretty much, I think. We have the pleasure to have Carol Adams, whom I will introduce in a few minutes, but just for those of you who are not familiar with Accounting for Impact or joining for the first time, Accounting for Impact is an initiative or network that we foster engagement and impact for accounting scholars, and actually not only accounting scholars, in scholars in general, to increase our impact on the world with our research. And today we have somebody who woke up at 6 in the morning from where she joins us. It was her choice from Melbourne, Australia. She is, I think, to me, incarnates very much the impact work of what accounting scholars can and should do. So, Professor Carol Adams, who is a Professor Emerita at Durham University and currently the chair of the Global Sustainability Standard Board, but as she will explain, she is coming at the end of her term for the last 3 years. I had a chance to really nicely work with her for a little bit over a year, but I'm sure this will come up in the conversation. So the way that we're gonna run this is I'm going to have a few questions, but a very broad question as a conversation. Carol will share her insights. She has lots of experience and things to tell you. And then we leave about 20, 25 minutes at the end for Q&A. Don't hesitate to drop questions in the chat box. We will monitor them. Leanne, my team member at AFI, will also monitor that and let you in. So I apologize for my voice. I'm coming from a trip with a thing, but the good news is I'm not the one who's doing most of the talking today. It's Carol. So with that said, thanks for Carol again for coming at this hour, but this was your preferred hour, so it's great. For me, it's 3 p.m. here, so it's perfect. Um, I'm going to start with a overall picture of the standard, like what we call a standard job or duties of a faculty member who is basically to conduct, publish research, do good teaching, and serve in various roles at the university. But then beyond that, we know that we have the opportunity sometimes to volunteer outside the university in various organizations. So the first question, the first two questions I would say you can do in two parts. What is usually the big motivation and motivator to go beyond what you have to do at university? Because obviously you don't have to do anything more. And this is a question that you actually had on LinkedIn, and I was really like, how do you get to do this? And should you bother? And I'll stop here. So I think it's a good start to get you going on your experience and what took you where you are and the questions that I asked you. So,
Thank you very much, Charles, and thank you for having me here. I think this is a very important network and great to see it. Thank you. So when I started doing this, there wasn't, as you say, a requirement to do it, but increasingly there is. And so at many UK universities like Durham, there is an expectation that there is some form of engagement work with outside organizations and policy and so on. Um, it really helps if you want to do it and can see the connection with your research, because I think you do have to be quite passionate about it. It is time consuming, but also very rewarding, I find. So I think the starting point is, not just to produce academic articles, but to get your research out in the media and in through professional body reports, um, and so on, social media, the press, and so on. and to think about your research in terms of what matters to practice and policy. So I started wanting to make changes. I wanted to see changes. I wanted to see an increase in accountability by organizations for their impacts on people and the environment and economies in lesser developed countries and so on. And from that, there are often the opportunities for engaging often arise from that thinking about your research in terms of how can you make a difference and what is the message that you want to make to people in practice and in policy. And from that, opportunities arise. It might be being on the committee of a professional accounting body, for example, which I have done with the ACCA initially, with ICAS and with SEMA and SIPFA and so on. Then there are invitations to speak at events which are not necessarily for academics, that are for business audiences. And you can also then start to think about how your research informs what's happening in the policy arena. So there are various policy consultations that come out. They might be by standard setters, they might be by your own governments and government agencies who are developing policy in the area that you're researching, and you can respond to those policy consultations. That might lead to invitations to speak formally in government arenas in response to those consultations. And then there might become opportunities to do some advisory work from that. So I did some advisory work with an asset owner and an asset manager, so big organizations which were themselves influential within their own sectors. So that then multiplies the influence that you can have. So, for example, I worked with an asset owner who was very keen to develop integrated reporting in a way that it was talking about value for its members, not just in terms of investment returns, but more broadly, members who were concerned about the environment and people and where there were labor issues within the industry sector that it represented, for example. And that asset owner influenced asset owners through its own networks. The CEO would be speaking at various places about the importance of this kind of accountability and reporting and thinking about value creation beyond investor returns. Am I answering your question, Charles, or am I
Yeah, yeah,
going
no, it's
on?
good. So I'll let you
Yes.
share some examples later as well, because you have done so many things. But I want to go back to your motivation answer when you say, "I want to make a difference." Like a lot of scholars, when they enter academia, especially emerging scholars, they want to do that. You're implying that doing research like you have published extensively, you have even founded a very key journal in the field, is not enough to make a difference. Do you have to go beyond that? That's one
Mm,
kind of
Well,
implication question. And
yes.
if you do this, at what stage of one's career should you do it? Because they
Ah,
are,
that's a good
yeah,
question. That
yeah,
is a that
yeah,
is a very good that is a very good question. Yes, I do think that, sitting at a desk doing research is fine, but where does it go? I see a lot of research as editor of SAMPJ, which is not going to make a difference to anything. It's just repeating past studies. It's not making a sufficient contribution. It's not drawing out practice and policy implications, for example. And I started off doing a lot of desk research so that I really knew the field. I did a lot of work initially looking at how the International Accounting Standards Board managed to harmonize accounting practices around the world, which were initially very different. There were cultural differences, there was a difference between the extent of case law versus regulation. The strength of the accounting profession was different. There was a difference in the type of ownership. So accounting practices were very different. And they were brought together. So that was largely desk research. And then I went on to looking at the theories in terms of social and environmental reporting and how they explained or didn't explain what was disclosed. And there were discrete theories, putting things in boxes, as it were, that yeah, none of them worked on their own particularly. I found that I had to look at a number of different theories to really try and explain things. But then I wanted to go inside organizations and look at what were the internal factors that influenced what was reported and how this was done? Because a lot of the work had been done to that point, just sitting at a desk looking at here's what's reported, how do we explain it? And when I went inside organizations, I found, a whole lot more things that influenced what was done. But I had done the work, first of all, understanding the academic research, and that was important. So having done that first, was to my mind a really good background in terms of understanding where the research was at. It helped also that I had worked within organizations before as a financial auditor, primarily. So I had some understanding of internal organizational systems, internal politics, um, the different ways that leadership influenced what was done within organizations and so on. So I could sort of put myself in the shoes of the people that I was talking to within organizations, and that's very helpful. If you don't have that to start with, then there are other ways of getting there, having this understanding and empathy with the people within the organizations about what they're trying to do and the context that they're working in. So yes, you're right. To do it initially, without understanding the research probably wouldn't have made a lot of sense because I wouldn't have known what I was wanting to look for, what I wanted to find. Um, but if you have a background of working within organizations, that is also a helpful place to start. Um, so yes, does
Yeah.
does that answer that
Yeah,
question?
I think you're implying like a lot of scholars are concerned. I see even a question as a young researcher that they want to do things, but then maybe the lack of understanding of research could be a barrier. But at the same time, you're saying that if you have experience at other organizations, you can also make a difference there. So maybe there's not perfect time, but we often hear, oh, you can do that later after you get your tenure or promotion or things like that, right? Um, so you've done a lot of things. I don't have a lot of more question after that because the big question is from your experiences, there were some challenges, obviously, I expect. Actually, I know because we share some. And you are also probably some rewarding moments, accomplishments of your impact work. So I want to let you this part open to share maybe starting with the challenges, giving examples of not only the GSSB, you did many things before GSSB, and other than standard setting bodies. And then what was really concretely visible accomplishment, rewarding outcomes that you got out of this work. And maybe we can have also some examples of that. Yeah.
Okay. Um, So I guess some of the challenges are that there are different attitudes in different parts of the world, perhaps. Some of it is cultural to what academics can contribute to this area. I think some people forget that many of us had lives before we became academics, and that even if we haven't, we do spend time engaging with organizations. We do, well, many of us, not all of us, we do have an understanding of how organizations work. Um, I think some of the most, I guess, some of the most rewarding times for me would have been when I was working as a Pro Vice Chancellor of Sustainability at a university, and I had the opportunity to develop a sustainability strategy and sustainability reporting with a really good mixed functional team. There was a sustainability expert, a communications expert, and so on. And we developed a cross-university sustainability strategy and sustainability reports that were externally assured. And so that was a real opportunity to apply what I had learnt through research and standard setting work to develop something that we were quite proud of, a tangible output. Another one would have been working with the asset owner that I mentioned, where they were able to influence other asset owners, pension funds, working with also an asset manager who had a portfolio where, as well as earning financial returns, they set out to earn have a positive social and environmental impact. And so it was working with them on how do we actually know whether that's the case? What are we looking for and how do we measure it? So that those are things where you can really make a difference. So they were in sectors that can make a difference, the finance sector, because to achieve the sustainable development goals, we need to shift capital to have this impact. So that was something that I guess I was proud of, that was able to make a difference. Um, so I guess those would be two key examples. In terms of standard setting, apart from the work with the Global Sustainability Standards Board, the GSSB, which are fantastic people, by the way, people from a range of different stakeholder groups brought together. But as well as that, I worked with the UNDP on their SDG impact standards. And that I was invited to do um, on the basis of the work that I did with the Sustainable Development Goal disclosure recommendations that were published by a number of accounting bodies and the International Integrated Reporting Council. So they saw that report and invited me to work with them on those standards. The work with the asset owner came about through the work that I had published on the um, work I'd done with the International Integrated Reporting Council and the work on sustainability. But it's not just about, you produce the report and the report goes out. I was always making connections with people. So I had an interest in what people in different organizations were doing to in the area. And so it's a combination of getting the work out through different types of media and making the space, making the time to meet people in the field and connected with the area. So those would be, I guess, a couple of examples of things I was particularly proud of. And the UK Research Excellence Framework that allowed us to, or allowed some of us to produce these impact case studies was a good way of framing it and provided a way of thinking about the work that I was doing. So you had to think about, well, what were you trying to achieve through the work? What was the impact that you had? And what is the evidence of the impact? I had to collect the evidence for the impact that my work was having. So letters from CEOs and reports, references in policy documents, and so on.
Good, good. I mean, those are positive various groups. You want to share maybe some challenges? I don't know how academics were perceived or how you deal with sometimes some barriers and challenges when you try and let's say you're invited to do some project and then you encounter some challenges. I think those are maybe interesting to know and maybe how you overcame. And then I'll take you the next last part on our common work with the GSSB. But if you can share a couple of challenges that you encountered and how you address those.
Okay, so I've always tried to give my views on things in an authentic way, in a way which I feel is backed up by evidence and research, and sometimes that doesn't land well with some people and some areas. Um, so, for example, when I was appointed to the GSSB, there was a lot of global press about it. It got a lot of coverage in the media. I got some feedback. This is great. You know, somebody with an accounting background, somebody who was looking at things from an evidence basis. But there was also some pressure from, I guess, those involved in funding the GRI in terms of comments that I had made. I think it was about the initial consultation document on whether the ISSB should be established. So um, I have to preface this with saying I do think the ISSB is doing some very important work now. I think what it does in terms of looking at the risks is very important. I also, however, think that a starting point for many of the risks that organizations face is their impacts that they have on people, the environment, and economies. So I think that you can't really look at the risks and can't get a complete picture of the risks unless you have looked at those impacts. So this work, I think, is very important, and I worked as chair of the GSSB to have a good relationship with the ISSB and look at how our collective work could together make a sensible system of corporate reporting. Um, but that said, I did have some issues with that initial consultation document. I mean, it started off with a question of, do we need global sustainability reporting standards? There were already some standards, and that wasn't really acknowledged in the document. There were the GRI standards. Um, there was an assumption that the IFRS Foundation had the best governance structures to do these standards. Now, I think the work that the IFRS Foundation have done on financial reporting, as I said to start with, I looked at the harmonization of that, was really important. That harmonization across the world on financial reporting, very important. But to make an assumption that those governance structures were necessarily the best for sustainability reporting without doing any analysis, without having the analysis there of what was actually needed for sustainability reporting, didn't sit well with me. So, I made some critiques and they were public, and that led to some pressure and some discontent that I had been appointed um, as the chair of the GSSB by some funding organizations that were, I guess, hoping that that were very particularly supportive of the IFRIS Foundation um, being a dominant standard setter in that area. Now that can happen anyway. I don't have an objection to that. I just I just really believe you can't look at the risks to organizations without thinking about their impact on sustainable development.
Hmm. I think you illustrated an example where, as academics, we have the privilege to have our voice, but then, of course, you have dissent, and politics go into play, just like anywhere. So sometimes it could discourage people to do it, but I think, as you did, as you said, you took the role. It leads me to that very topic, good segue, and maybe we can end here before the Q&A, and we can keep talking, but. I I was also at the end involved. This ISSB, GSSB sort of tension kind of resulted in our one of them is this paper, this global reporting systems paper, which I was you were leading the project, but it's online. I will put the post. Can you tell us about this paper a bit, how it started, and what do you think you will bring and contribute to and help?
Well, I think it goes back to that previous discussion that the previous point that I was making that in the initial narrative there wasn't a discussion about, well, here we have the GRI standards, we have the ISSB going to produce another set of standards. How do they fit together? I believe that they can fit together. I believe that both are very important. Initially, the ISSB, the IFRS consultation document, there was a sort of a sitting on the fence about, are we just reporting in a way, providing information that a subset of investors want, or are we providing information actually on sustainability reporting for a broad range of stakeholders? So there was some inconsistencies in the way that that was initially thought out. I think that the two sets of standards developed sort of in parallel for now can work well. I know there's a lot of talk about wanting to see one set of standards. That can't work just now because the IFRS Foundation's mandate is to, and the ISSB's mandate is to look at reporting to a narrow set of investors. Um, so at this point of time, there can't be just one set of standards if we want to cover a whole range of things. But if we develop agendas together, if we look, for example, at how when an organization reports on impacts using GRI standards, what are the risks of those impacts to the organization? That is something that the GRI standards don't look at, which the IFRS S standards developed by the ISSB could and should look at, to my view. So it's the paper was really developed to by the GSSB and the excellent team at GRI, um, taking into account all our many comments, because the GSSB members did have a lot of input into this document. How can this work together? And then what is the role of things like the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board? And There we also worked very closely with them. So myself and Bastian Buck, the Chief Standards Officer, presented to them a couple of times. I was involved in their focus group developing their ISSA 5000 standards. And I'm very pleased that came out looking also at assurance of the process, for example, of developing of identifying the most material issues, because that is really important. It's not just about looking at what's reported. We have to be sure that what is reported are the most important issues. And so that standard, that ISSA 5000 standard, can be applied to both GRI reporting and reporting under the IFRS S standard. So that was an important collaboration. Then I've also engaged with the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, because when you think about the public sector, really, this is where reporting on impacts and the impact of the work that they had is critical, because many public sector agencies and public sector organizations exist to have a social, environmental, and economic impact. And so re reporting using GRI disclosures, GRI standards is particularly important for that sector. So looking at how all of these things can fit together was really the purpose of that paper. And the work that we've been doing, engaging with the ISSB members on a regular basis. There's been a subset of GSSB members, including myself, that have met regularly with ISSB members, looking at how we might develop a better narrative around the work that each organization is doing for the benefit of reporters and the users of reports.
Thank you, because I think there's a lot of questions around how these two bodies are going to end up working. And recently, I was even asked the same question. And this paper, I think, reflects, I think it solves all the problems, but I think it makes a move towards hopefully a better convergence if we ever get there. There was a question about the public sector, so I'm glad you touched upon it, but we can go back to that question. I'm going to leave you just the last word before we take questions on anything that I didn't ask and you wanted to say, because I may have missed something, and also any advice that you have for the audience. It's composed of mainly academics of different stages of their career. So just a few minutes if you just want to say something that was not, discussed here, and what do you want to suggest to our audience here?
I think that we've probably discussed the key issues. And you're right, that global reporting systems paper was put out as a with the view that it's a conversation starter. How do we, it's our view, it's the GSSB's view of how we can make sense of all of this. And so there does need to be more conversations around this. In terms of advice, I think the thing would be aware of that you don't know everything when you're going into an organization. And I've seen this with PhD students doing engagement work for their PhD, which is fantastic. But don't assume that the people that you're talking to are going to see things the way you do. Don't start talking about theories. Won't have any interest, won't resonate. Um, you've really got to think about the person that you're going to be interviewing, think about the context of their work, and try and put yourself in their shoes. That's not to say that you cannot then also be critically thinking as you're doing the interview and as you're analyzing the results. But you have to have that balance of being able to see their perspective and their context, whilst also being able to step back and to think about what you're hearing and seeing in a critical way. Um, think about, what do I know? What might I not know? When I first started interviewing people in organizations, I really did have a big aha moment. This was in the early 1990s. Most of the work had been in the field had been desk research, looking at what was reported and trying to analyze that and think about that from the perspective of theories without talking to people. And I realized when I went into organizations that there was a big gap in research. And Carlos Larrinaga and I, he's here in the audience, um, wrote some work, did some work looking at how we can turn that round and what the avenues for doing this kind of engagement research might be.
That's really insightful, great advice. Yes, thank you, Carlos, for being here as well. I know it's a bit late in Europe, but so we will. Thank you, Carol. We have some questions I will maybe ask because we are quite informal, unless you prefer to read the question. But it go back to the question of the doing of not doing impact. So Anna Tilba, uh, if you are comfortable, you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly to Carol, or if you prefer, I can read the question. Anna?
Oh, Anna would be very comfortable asking a question.
Oh, you know her? Okay, Anna. Okay.
Thank
Well,
you.
I see she's on the call. I'm
But
not sure. Yeah.
she's not, she's still on mute, so maybe you have to ask it, Charles.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, she first asked, the question is, how can we change the prevailing mindset of why should we do impact to why shouldn't we? So, yeah, what shouldn't we do impact to get motivated to research to make a difference? So she kind of turned the question around. So how would you answer that?
Well, yeah, I think that is a good point. I think we're doing research is actually a very it costs somebody money. We might not get research grants, but our salaries are being paid, and they are being paid very often through revenue from students. Our universities exist to do some good. I mean, many university annual reports now are talking about the contribution that research is making to society and the environment. And we have a public duty, we have a responsibility, I would say, to apply this knowledge that is gained through funds derived from student income, communities, governments, and so on, to put it to do some good, to make some difference, to analyze situations, whatever it might be that's linked to our research, to feed into developments in practice and policy, and for the well-being of people, societies, and so on. And many universities are now starting to try and articulate what they do in those terms, not just in terms of value for students or value for money. Many of them are looking beyond that now. And so I do think that is a very good question. And I think we have a responsibility to be thinking about, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this research? Why does it matter? And I said at the beginning, it's worth saying again, I see so much research which appears to be just done for the sake of it in order to get published. People start with, here is some data. What can we do with this data that maybe hasn't been done before or that has been done before, but how can we make it a little bit different? That's not the way, in my view, um, that we should be thinking about research, because it all costs, as I say. There is a cost to doing any research, whether it's funded externally by a grant funding body or not. We should be thinking about what are the problems that I, as a researcher, want to address. And for me, it's about sustainable development, social impacts of organizations on society, the environment, economies in lesser developed countries. So, what are the problems that I, as a researcher, would like to address? What are the issues? And then, how can I go about doing it? To start with, here's some data. What can I do with it? Very shallow in my mind, somewhat superficial. It's fine to start off in the research in a research career. It gives you the skills to for writing, analyzing data, thinking. But if you are starting off that way to learn the craft of research, to learn the craft of data analysis and so on, and critical thinking, think of it as a step to something else. Learn the craft, yes, but then think about, well, now I have the skills. What can I do with them? What problems can I solve?
I fully agree with everything you said, obviously, but thank you for the answering, Anna. And you can also raise your hands, but I'm gonna keep looking at the chat. I know Laida has asked a couple of questions, but uh, if you could unmute yourself, ask just the first question, and because I know you asked a few, because I like to give room to others. So, Laida, if you're still online,
Yes, I'm here.
yeah,
Thank you very much, both of you. Carol, it's an honor because you were one of my first inspirations when I started in research. I came from organization because I was like working for 10 years in external university, external organizations. And one of the aspects that I realized it was that maybe from a critical point of view, but many times organizations do things because they are obliged to. And in sometimes the way they do these things is just to, like pass and get the approve. So when I had the chance to move to academia to research, I had very clear that I wanted to research about these questions and how to engage organizations and changes and all together. So first of all, I find a little bit, I don't know if it is normal, but what I am finding now is it's a little bit difficult sometimes to organizations, at least in Spain, that is where I come from, to get, like listen to academia because the perception of the distance between academia and real life of organizations, it's like big. I think can be one of the reasons. Maybe Carlos can explain it better, or he has more experience on that. And the second thing was that on my PhD, I was focused on analyzing adoption of by organization of SDG principles according to GRI. And now I'm trying to make my mind about all the new regulations in Europe because what I can the background I got from the organizations I'm involved is that it's too complicated and still it's changing, so it's difficult for them also to know what to do and how to do it. I don't know. Both of the two principles things that I'm fighting for this moment. I don't know if you have any recommendations how to handle both of things.
To be honest, I'm not sure what the question is there. You seem to be reinforcing what I've said already. Have I missed a question?
Yeah, you already answered a lot of things, but maybe it's how to break or make the distance not so big between academia and organization that you already explained. And then with so many regulations, things happening on, and still not being like stable. I don't know how to to handle this with organizations?
So I think if I've understood correctly, it is really about putting yourself in the shoes of the people within the organization. So thinking about, well, this is the research field. This is the lived lives of people within organizations and what's happening. These are the policy issues that are going on, being developed in the EU and so on. How can one inform the other? And I think keeping those questions in mind, and it's not all one way. So I have found that by doing this work with standard setters, policy consultations, and work with organizations, that I have a much better feel for what are the pertinent research questions to be asked. What might researchers be doing? So it does benefit the research as well. I might not be answering your question directly, but I guess this is another question of why bother? There is this gap. But to try and bridge it and understand it, not only helps the research inform what's happening in practice and policy, but it also helps inform future research questions, and how you think about the research methods that you might employ. What questions might you ask interviewees and so on. So it is worth it's the challenge is there, but it's worth the effort in my view.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
We have a question that you did mention the International Public Sector Accounting Standard Board, but from Kim Shah. If you want to elaborate, or are you okay with the discussion, the mention that she had, Kim? If you want to mute, there we go. Hi.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah.
Thanks, Charles. I'm a big fan of Professor Adams. I don't know if she remembers me. Earlier this year, I hosted a panel that she.
Yes, of course I do.
So she's been her research has been really profound in my world. So a bit of backdrop of it. The question is that I'm curious about the GSSB engaging with the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, also known as IPSASB, to evolve government reporting to capture sustainability, ESG, and impact aspects. Is there any sort of work, or what work is being conducted there? Because it's so great that there's a lot of material out there that talks about like the capital markets or the investor world, but what's also as crucial is in the public sector, healthcare and education are really managed, run, and executed by the governments. And sure, the implicit nature of it is it's all social, but we're not measuring impact. So how can we get impact measured? So for the accountability and make sure taxpayers' dollars are going to really quality education and healthcare.
Yeah, very good question. I did some work with the public sector accounting body, SIPFA, looking at what is the extent of sustainability reporting, and the requirements of sustainability reporting of public sector organizations, and found that different areas of the public sector have their own guidelines. There are differences across countries and so on. And I really think this is where the GRI standards have an important role, for the reasons that I said earlier. And much more work needs to be done in the public sector in terms of reporting on the impacts of their work. And I do see synergies with the work that the IPSASB have done, particularly in their reporting guidelines for the public sector, which could incorporate a lot more of these impact disclosures, so that we don't have all these different ways of doing it in different parts of the public sector and in different countries. And that would make sense for a whole lot of reasons, including transferability of skills and so on, and for funding purposes. But there is a lot of work to be done, and what the IPSASB has focused on so far is implementing the standards set by the ISSB, the climate S2 standard in particular. Fine, no problem with that. But this is, but the main, it's somewhat of a missed opportunity, I would say. Let's put it politely, because the public sector is it's it's not raising a lot of funds from shareholders, which is what the ISSB standards are designed for. That is their audience. And so it's fine to implement that standard on climate change S2. No issues there. There are risks to the organization which they need to be thinking about, but really the public sector needs to be addressing the impact of their work on society, the environment, and economies. And the GRI standards are fine for that. There may need to be some adaptation in different parts of the public sector, but they are entirely appropriate for doing that. And one of the things that I've been keen to do, and which we're getting very close to achieving, is having a distinct stakeholder constituency within GRI of the public sector, so that it's clear that the standards are appropriate for the public sector.
Right.
Excellent. I think I'll be following up with you then to find out more about that. Thank you, Professor Adams.
Okay, we have a few minutes left. I'm trying to squeeze 3 questions. We have 2 online and 1 Laura's hand. So Sinisha, are you online? I think it's kind of related to what you mentioned when you have those sort of tension, control review with somebody from the ISSB, how you handle that. So, I don't know if you want to say, basically the question is, how do you handle to work interview with someone that may have control review with you? And she gave, for example, when you deal with ISSB?
Well, it is in part about understanding what they're trying to do, what their mandate is, what they've been instructed to do, what their key stakeholders are expecting of them. It is in part being clear about what we, as the GSSB and GRI, have set out to do. And then trying to understand, where is the common ground? How could these two opposing, if you like, in terms of audience, definitely in terms of audience and goals, how can these two opposing or contradictory goals, if you like, how can they work together to achieve something that's better than the sum of both the parts, I guess. The GRI standards don't deal with the risks to the organizations. That is important. That can help advance what we are all trying to achieve in terms of working towards sustainable development if we work together. It won't if it's the only thing in town, but it's that kind of thinking, I guess.
So relatedly, Amer had a question. Amer, you want to
Yeah, I want to
ask your
thank
life?
so thank you for organizing this. I'll just kind of say one personal thing before I jump to the question. Professor Adams, you were the reason that I shifted from the industry to academia to conduct my PhD on reporting. So thank you. This has been kind of a personal thing for me. But I've been working with the GRI for years as a disclosure or a sustainability manager. Right now, how the harmonization is happening. If I'm the sustainability manager for Nesta, I need to continue to do a GRI with a content index, a SASB with a SASB index, a CDP score. In the back end, we were hoping that seriously, the GRI has been working on this for years. And if they're doing that for material investors, just from an investment lens, like the guidance should still be through the GRI. So how is the GSSB leading that discussion? That's my question. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. I think there are two ways. I mean, the role as GSSB chair is a voluntary role, but I have spent a lot of time talking with people at the ISSB. We've spent a lot of time engaging. They have come to our standards board as well. So that's one thing. And this global reporting systems paper is designed to get the discussion out there and to have more of a discussion. I will say, I think the word harmonization doesn't really apply here. Harmonization is a word that was entirely appropriate for the work that the IASB did in financial reporting, where there was a challenge of harmonizing reporting practices around the world. That challenge does exist to some extent in the public sector. But in terms of corporate reporting, most large organizations around the world are using the GRI standards and have started off using the GRI standards. So there isn't that need for global harmonization as there was with financial reporting. But as you said, there is this need to think about, there's all these various standards, how do they fit and work together? And that has been, a big question in my mind, a big focus of the work that I've tried to do as GSSB chair. And that is a work in progress.
Thank you. Last but not least, Laura. Yeah.
Hello, hi. Thanks very much, Professor Adams. I found this the whole conversation really inspiring. I'm not sure if it's a question or I'm not sure exactly what I'm aiming at, but can you build a connection with the practice at this early stage of your careers? Because like in my mind, for being able to sit in a place where you can have an impact, you might, for example, have I don't know, a strong publication record that can state that you have enough knowledge or have enough experience to be able, to say something. So my question is, given that we are quite familiar on how the process of publication might be long and challenging, while we build this academic profile, what can we do to start building this network?
Okay, so most universities will have, well, I would imagine they all have to varying degrees, communications departments whose role it is to help promote research findings. If you think you have some research which is relevant to practice and policy, talk to them. Talk to them about how to convey those research findings in a way that people in practice and policy will understand and receive it and for it to make sense. Two things are things you do at your desk, I agree, but they get you noticed in those spheres of practice and policy. Work with professional accounting bodies, industry organizations. You will then get invited to speak at things. You will get invited to events where people from practice and policy go, and then you get to meet people. And that's really where it all starts. And it does take time. It can take many years. I have been working on in this way since the 1990s. So it is time consuming, and you have to want to do it because it doesn't lead to, the big journal hits that some universities and some, it doesn't lead immediately, should I say, to the big journal hits that some universities are pushing you for promotion. But it can do later on because you, through that work, you are developing ideas about relevant research questions, which leads to good academic journal publications further down the track.
Thank you. Yeah, I would
Thank
agree.
you.
It does take a lot of efforts. Academics are, it doesn't just come to your desk. You have to go get the people, that's for sure. I think Carol has been almost a career long seeking to engage with those practitioners, stakeholders, policymakers. So yeah, it's a huge effort you have to do on top of your regular requirements. So very, very good. Thank you, Carol. I should say that I am a bit sad that her term as a GSSB chair ends at the end of this month. We have our meeting next week, so I guess her last meeting with her. So I had a privilege to be on the board with her. I have known Carol for a number of years, of course, but I think this is also hopefully a nice way to also share your experiences this way. This event is recorded. Hopefully, it inspired all of you or most of you here. You're joining from all over the world. Thank you for taking the time. So our next event for Organic for Impact will be sometime at the end of June. We are still figuring out the speaker. We'll aim to have 3 or 4 events a year, so basically every quarter or so. So you will hear from us and at the next event. But for now, we'd like to thank again Carol. Uh, she's an accomplished scholar and probably an exemplar for all of us. So thank you again, and see you next event. And Carol, I'll see you next week at the GSSB.
Thank you all very much for your interest, and good luck in doing this type of work in the future. Thank you. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Nati. Bye.
Bye-bye.